Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Assalamualaikum.
Are we all set to start?
Assalamualaikum. Good morning, everyone.
Assalamualaikum. Should we start, Aman?
Yes,
We
sir.
have a couple of minutes. We have 2 minutes to go.
Okay. We're still waiting for Professor Shahid Ayub as well.
Dr. Saad.
Dr. Salman, should we start?
Sir, can you hear me, sir?
Aman, yes.
Sir, can I start?
Aman, just let's wait for 1 more minute and then probably we can start because we still have participants coming on.
Okay, sir.
I'll give a brief introduction and then you can start.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Aman, are you ready?
Yes, sir. I'm ready, sir.
So that's already 7:48. I think we should start with the introduction. I welcome you all to the Residence Corner Module 1. This is the 5th lecture in this series. These lectures are arranged by Department of Neurosurgery at Liaquat National Hospital, Karachi. The idea of these sessions is to discuss neuroanatomy and be able to develop a 3D anatomy which you can use at the time of surgery. It is able to correlate anatomy with radiology. Today, we will be discussing the anatomy of occipital lobe and correlating that anatomy with radiology. Dr. Aman is Senior Registrar at Liaquat National Hospital. Our expert panelist today, I think we're still waiting, is Professor Shahid Ayub. Dr. Ayub is professor at Hayatabad Medical Complex in KPK and is also the Vice President of Pakistan Society of Neurosurgeon. Before Dr. Aman starts with his presentation, I urge all the participants to participate at maximum. When a question is asked, this is the time to be wrong because nobody will judge you for it. So take full use of this session. Dr. Aman, can you please start your presentation?
Okay, sir. So today I'm going to discuss the occipital lobe anatomy, and the objectives of my presentation will be anatomy, radiology, and lesion localization. So the occipital lobe is present behind the parietal and temporal lobe, and it is one of the smallest lobe of the cerebral hemisphere as compared to the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes. And as we can see in this diagram, it rests on the tentorium, which separates the occipital lobe from the cerebellum. As compared to the skull, it lies underneath the occipital bone. Now, this occipital lobe is separated from the parietal and temporal lobe by an imaginary line, which is drawn from the parieto-occipital sulcus on the superolateral border down to the a notch which is present at the inferior border of the brain. And the occipital lobes, both paired occipital lobes are separated from each other in the midline by a deep fissure known as the cerebral fissure. Now we come to the discuss the surfaces of the occipital lobe, and basically the occipital lobe consists of 3 surfaces. Number first, lateral surface, medial surface, and the inferior surface. Now, first of all, I will discuss the lateral surface of the occipital lobe. There are 3 characteristics occipital sulci present on the lateral surface. These sulci divides the lateral surface into different gyri. The first one is the intra-occipital sulcus, the transverse occipital sulcus, and the lateral occipital sulcus. So this is the lateral surface of the occipital lobe, and we can see the intra-occipital sulcus, which is basically a continuation of the intraparietal sulcus down into the occipital lobe. The lateral occipital sulcus, which runs horizontally on the lateral surface of the occipital lobe up to the occipital pole, and the transverse sulcus is the smallest, which is runs transversely at the superior surface of the occipital lobe. So the in this diagram, this is the posterior view of the occipital lobe. The lobe which is present medial to the intra-occipital sulcus, forms the superior occipital gyrus, and the lobe which is present in between the intra-occipital sulcus and the lateral occipital sulcus form the medial occipital gyrus. And the gyrus which is present below this lateral sulcus forms the inferior occipital gyri. The inferior occipital gyri and the superior occipital gyri meet at the posterior end. So this junction is also known as the occipital fold. This is diagrammatic representation for better understanding of the sulci and gyri of the occipital lobe. So we can see the intraparietal sulcus continues. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
So we can see the intraparietal sulcus from the parietal lobe continues down into the occipital lobe as a continuation of the intraparietal sulcus. And this is the small transverse sulcus, and this is the lateral horizontal sulcus. And this is the superior occipital gyrus, and this portion is the medial occipital gyrus, and this is the inferior orbital or inferior occipital gyrus. These two meet at the posterior end, and this junction also known as the occipital fold. And this is another diagram showing the superior occipital gyrus, the middle occipital gyrus, and the inferior occipital gyrus. And this is the pre-occipital notch, and this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and an imaginary line divides the occipital lobe from the temporal and the parietal lobe. This is the diagram taken from the roton anatomy, and we can appreciate all the gyri and sulci on the occipital lobe. So if we see, this is the superior occipital gyrus, and this is the inferior occipital gyrus. And this small portion, we can see this is the from the medial occipital gyrus. And here we can see the intraparietal sulcus continues down into the occipital lobe as intra-occipital sulcus. And this is the transverse or lateral occipital sulcus. Now we come to the inferior surface of the occipital lobe. Basically, again, the inferior surface is separated from the temporal lobe by an imaginary line that is drawn from the pre-occipital notch up to the parieto-occipital sulcus. And the inferior surface is basically formed by the three gyri: the lingual gyrus, the fusiform gyrus, and the inferior temporal gyrus, which continues down from the temporal lobe up to the occipital lobe. Here we can see this portion is the lingual gyrus, and this is the medial portion is the fusiform gyrus, continues up to the occipital lobe, and this portion is the inferior temporal gyrus. Now we come to the medial surface of the occipital lobe. The medial surface of the occipital lobe is separated from the parietal lobe by a deep fissure known as the parieto-occipital fissure or parieto-occipital sulcus. And there is another sulcus on the medial surface also known as the calcarean fissure, which runs from the parieto-occipital sulcus below the corpus callosum, that runs upward and posteriorly up to the occipital pole. Yes, sir. The cursor. Cursor, where is cursor? Where is cursor? Yes, sir. Okay. This is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this the calcarine fissure starts just below the corpus callosum and runs upward and posteriorly and then downward up to the occipital pole. Now, this fissure divides the medial surface into two gyri. The gyri that is present above the calcarine fissure is known as the cuneus, and the gyrus that is present below the calcarine fissure is known as the lingual gyrus. And this is again another diagram showing the medial surface of the occipital lobe with a medial surface, and we can appreciate the parieto-occipital sulcus and the calcarine fissure, and this is the small dotted line is the calcarine fissure, and this portion the above which is situated above the calcarine fissure is known as the cuneus, and this is the lingual gyrus. Again, this is a cadaveric diagram. We can appreciate the parieto-occipital sulcus, the calcarine fissure, the cuneus, and the lingual gyrus. This is the inferior surface already I discussed, and we can see the inferior surface of the occipital lobe is formed by three gyri: the lingual, the fusiform gyrus, and the inferior temporal gyrus. This part of the fusiform gyrus, which is form the base of the occipital lobe, is also known as the post fusiform gyrus, and it is separated from the lingual gyrus by the continuation of the collateral sulcus, and the post fusiform gyrus is separated from the inferior temporal gyrus by the occipitotemporal sulcus. This is again the inferior view of the brain showing the occipital lobe. Here we can appreciate this is the inferior temporal gyrus, and this is the fusiform gyrus that continues from the temporal lobe down into up to the occipital lobe, and this is the lingual gyrus. Here we can also appreciate the calcarine. This is the calcarine fissure, and this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and the portion in between these two sulci forms the cuneus. Now I will discuss the blood supply to the occipital lobe. Basically, the blood supply to occipital lobe is from the posterior cerebral arteries that supplies the medial and inferior surface of the occipital lobe, while the lateral surface receives most of its supply from the branches of the middle cerebral artery. Now you can appreciate this is the basilar artery, and these the internal carotid arteries. Basilar artery divides into right and left PCA. The PCA, after arising from the basilar artery, travels down into the ambient cisterns and the quadrigeminal cisterns. It is joined by the branch from the internal carotid artery known as the PCOM, and the posterior cerebral artery divides into different parts from P1 up to the P4. Now, the P1 is formed from its origin up to the junction of the PCOM. And then the P2 starts from the junction of the PCOM down up to the emergence from the quadrigeminal systems. And the P3 starts from the its origin from the quadrigeminal system down to its terminal branches. Throughout its course, from the P1 segment up to its terminal branches, it gives rise to different branches that supplies the medial and inferior surface of the occipital lobe. I will discuss later these branches. Now, this is a diagrammatic representation of the blood supply to the occipital lobe for better understanding. This is the PCS arising from the basilar artery. After its origin, it is joined by the PCOM, and this segment forms the P1 segment. And then from the P starts the P2 segment that travels in the ambient and the quadrigeminal systems. Now, from B, can appreciate from the P2 segment, this branch arises known as the posterior medial choroidal artery, and it's another branch arises from this P2 segment known as the posterior lateral choroidal artery. Both these branches contribute to the formation of the choroidal plexus of the lateral ventricles. Now, in this diagram, we can see the branches arising from different parts of the PCA that supplies the inferior and medial surface of the occipital lobe. From the P2 segment, we can appreciate two branches arises. The first one known as the anterior temporal branch, and the second branch is known as the posterior temporal branch that supplies most of the inferior portion of the temporal and the occipital parts of the occipital lobe. From the P3 segment, two branches arises. One is the posterior parieto-occipital branch and the calcarine branch. The posterior parieto-occipital branch supplies the pole and the posterior most part of the occipital lobe, while the calcarine branch travels upward and medially along on the medial surface to supply the medial surface of the occipital lobe. These are the different branches. Now, this is a better diagrammatic representation of the different branches arising from the P2 and P3 segment that supplies the occipital lobe. From the P2 segment, as I discussed already, this branch this is the anterior temporal branch, this is the posterior temporal branch. From the P2 segment supplies the temporal and part of the posterior part of occipital lobe. And the P3 segment then divides into parieto-occipital branch and the calcarine branch that supplies the remaining part of the occipital lobe and the medial surface of the occipital lobe. And these terminal branches are also known as the P4 segment of the PCA. Now I will discuss the radiological anatomy of the occipital lobe. This is MRI brain sagittal view, mid-sagittal cut, and we can appreciate.
Dr. Aman, can you ask the participants if they can identify the structures?
Okay, sir.
The participants online can write it in the chat box. So Dr. Aman is going to ask you questions, and you all should answer. As I said, there's no harm in being wrong. You can use the numbers as they're written on the diagram.
Yes, sir. So, can someone tell the number 2? What's this structure is?
So Dr. Aruj Bhatti is saying this is the parieto-occipital sulcus.
Right.
Do you
And
agree, Doctor?
yes, sir, it's right, sir.
So can you point out the parieto-occipital sulcus?
Yes, sir. This is the parieto-occipital sulcus. And can someone tell what is this sulcus?
Number 6. What is number 6?
What is number 6? Yes.
Calcarine fissure. Some Dr. Aruj Bhatti and I think Dr. Pravat is saying and Dr. Adnan Khalik is saying that it is calcarine sulcus. Are they right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, right. And what forms the number 1?
What is number 1, guys? Some of them I think already answered this. So I'm just waiting for the others to chip in. Number 1, Aruj Bhatti, Dr. Aruj Bhatti is saying, and Dr. Rafe, and all of them are probably right. Cuneus.
Yeah, agree, sir. Right, sir. And what is number 5?
Guys, what is number 5? Dr. Aruj Bhatti is saying we have got experts here. I think you're really good at explaining Dr. Aruj Bhatti is saying that's lingula.
Yes, I agree, sir. This is the lingula.
Uh,
Lingual gyrus.
Lingual gyrus. So can you explain the MRI once more, and then we'll move forward. So
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. This is a parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the calcarine fissure. The calcarine fissure is joined by at the middle half by the parieto-occipital sulcus. So these the parieto-occipital sulcus separate it from the parietal lobe, and the calcarine fissure divides the medial surface into cuneus and the lingual gyrus. This is an MRI brain axial view, and we can appreciate this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the calcarine sulcus, and this lobe, this part of the occipital lobe forms the cuneus, which is situated above the calcarine sulcus. And here we can also appreciate the superior occipital gyrus and the middle occipital gyrus.
can you show the transverse and horizontal sulcus?
Sir, on this diagram, they are not so clear, and I will see in the next slide if I can.
So basically, this is an axial image, and you can see the lateral occipital cortex anatomy. You can see the two gyri, the middle and the yes.
Yes.
And you can see the intra occipital sulcus, and then you can see the extension of the parieto-occipital and calcarine sulcus with cuneus. Is that right?
Yes, sir. You are right, sir.
Can you explain this again one more time so that they understand?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is the parieto-occipital fissure, and this is the calcarine sulcus, and this part above the calcarine sulcus forms the cuneus, and this posterior pole, the posterior part, will be saying this is the superior occipital gyrus, and lateral to it, this is the middle occipital gyrus.
And the sulcus in between is the intra-occipital sulcus.
Maybe, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is the intra-occipital sulcus. And now this is the MRI.
So can you ask the participant?
Okay, sir. Can someone tell what's number 4?
So guys, what's number 4? Anyone? So it's a sulcus, right?
Yes,
Uh,
it's a sulcus. And what's the sulcus?
Dr. Ruj and Dr. Mohammed Rafi are saying that this is, and Dr. Pravat are saying that this is parieto-occipital sulcus. So are
right,
they
sir,
right?
right? Yes, sir. Yeah, right. Yes.
Okay.
And what is the number 3?
So guys, what is number 3? Dr. Uruj is saying that this is the calcarine sulcus. Dr. Pravat is also saying that this is the calcarine sulcus, and is Dr. Fawaz, I think, are they right, Dr. Aman?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They are right, sir. And
Okay.
what is the number 1?
So guys, what is number 1, which is above the calcarine sulcus? Which? So is Dr. Pravat and Dr. Afifa and Dr. Mohammed Rafi are saying that it is cuneus. Are they right?
Yes, sir. Agree, sir. Agree.
And Dr. Fawaz as well.
Yes. And can someone tell me what is this structure?
Can you point it out or number?
Yes, sir. What is this?
So guys, what is this sulcus or fissure that Dr. Aman is showing with his mouse?
Yes.
It's possibly one of those fissures that travels from
Yes,
forward. And intraoccipital, Dr. Pavat is saying that this is intraoccipital sulcus. Is he right?
Yes, sir. Right. And what is
Okay.
this? What is this part? What is this gyrus?
Dr. Uruj, it's not intraorbital, it's intraoccipital sulcus. Okay, so Dr. Aman has pointed out to another gyri. Dr. Aman, can you point it out again? Dr. Pravat has already answered. Most of the people, Dr. Ariba, Dr. Pravat, are saying that this is superior occipital gyrus. Are they right?
Yes, sir. They are right. And what is this gyrus?
So guys, what is this gyrus that Dr. Aman is showing that is, I think, beneath the calcarine sulcus? Dr. Oswin, Dr. Vega, Dr. Uruj Bhatti, they are saying that's lingula. Dr. Aman, are they right?
Yes, sir, they are right. And what is this part?
So what is the part that Dr. Aman is currently pointing out? It's most probably a gyrus, I guess. So which
Yes.
gyrus is he referring to? Guys, which gyrus is he referring to? Aman, keep pointing so that they know.
Yes, sir.
Anyone? Which gyrus is this? I think he's pointing on to the lateral surface gyrus.
This is inferior surface. Inferior surface are
Inferior surface.
discussed.
So, Dr. Aman, I think I don't see any answers. Can you explain which gyrus is this?
I already discussed inferior surface.
Dr. Oswin, sorry. Dr. Oswin is saying that this is a fusiform gyrus.
Yes, post fusiform gyrus. And this portion and this gyrus is, what is this gyrus?
So what's the gyrus that Dr. Aman is showing? Pravat, that Dr. Pravat, you're right. But what is this gyrus that he's showing? Anyone? What is the gyrus? Occipitotemporal. Dr. Oswin is saying that this is the occipitotemporal gyrus.
I agree, sir. Right. He is right, sir.
Is right?
Yes,
okay. Sir. So can you explain the diagram yourself now that they've all identified? Can you explain it one more time?
Yes, sir. So this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the calcarine fissure. The calcarine fissure mostly runs on the medial surface, but sometimes it goes up to the occipital fold on the lateral surface. So the portion that is situated in between the parietal and the calcarine fissure forms the cuneus, and the portion and the gyrus that is present below the calcarine fissure forms the cuneus. And so this is the inferior surface of the occipital lobe, and already I discussed it is formed by 3 gyri: the lingual gyrus, the post fusiform gyrus and the inferior temporal gyrus. And here we can see the intraparietal sulcus that runs down into the occipital lobe as a intra-occipital sulcus. Okay, sir. Okay, sir. I'm going back. This is the inferior surface of the occipital lobe. The inferior surface is separated from the temporal lobe by an imaginary line, which is drawn from the parieto-occipital fissure. This is the parieto-occipital fissure, and this is the parieto-occipital notch, and this is the imaginary line that is drawn from parieto-occipital fissure up to the parieto-occipital notch. So this imaginary line divides the occipital lobe from the temporal lobe. Now we can appreciate the three gyri that forms the inferior surface of the occipital lobe. This is the lingual gyrus, this is the post fusiform gyrus, and this is the inferior temporal gyrus. The lingual gyrus is separated from the post fusiform gyrus by the continuation of the collateral sulcus, and the post fusiform gyrus is separated from the inferior temporal gyrus by the occipito-temporal sulcus. So yes. No, this is the inferior temporal.
So whenever there's a question by the participant there, you should share it with us as well, because those online would not be able to hear.
Yes, yes, I'm going to show these guys. So this is the parieto-occipital fissure or sulcus, and this is the calcarine fissure, and this is the intra-parietal sulcus that goes down into the occipital lobe as a intra-occipital sulcus. So the portion that is situated in between these two sulci forms the cuneus, and the gyrus that is just situated just below the calcarine fissure forms the lingual gyrus. And this is the as we already say, the lingual gyrus is this is the lingual gyrus, and this is the lateral, just lateral to the lingual gyrus form is the post fusiform gyrus. And here we can see the small indentation, which is the occipito-temporal sulcus, which separates the post fusiform gyrus from the inferior temporal gyrus. So now everyone is clear. Now I will discuss some lesions of the occipital lobe, and localization of these lesions where they are situated. This is a MRI brain showing a lesion, and can someone tell where this lesion is located, in which part of the occipital lobe?
Guys, use the chat box, please. So where is this lesion located? Anyone? Where is this lesion located? It's okay to be wrong. So Dr. Uruj Bhatti is saying that it's in the cuneus, and it's involving the parieto-occipital sulcus. Dr. Pravat is saying, and Dr. Fawaz saying it's the cuneus. Dr. Mohammed Rafi is saying that it's the parieto-occipital sulcus, and Dr. Jibran Tariq is saying that it's the cingulate. That's so. Dr. Aman,
yes.
Is it cuneus?
Yes, sir. All are right. as we can see here in the on sagittal MRI, this is the calcarine fissure, and this is the parieto-occipital sulcus. And this Dr. Jibran Tariq is also right. This portion is the cingulate gyrus. So this lesion is basically involving the precuneus, the cingulate gyrus, and part of the cuneus of the occipital lobe.
Can you explain? Okay, this is the
Yes,
next. Yeah, bit of anatomy on the MRI again. Can you explain it again?
Yes, sir. We can see this is the calcarine fissure, and this is the somewhat parieto-occipital sulcus, and this part is the cingulate gyrus, and this portion is the precuneus. So basically, this lesion is involving the precuneus, the part of the cuneus of the occipital lobe, and part of the cingulate gyrus. And this is another MRI brain with the axial and sagittal view. And can someone tell where is this lesion is located?
So, guys, where is this lesion? Dr. Osman, Dr. Fawad, everybody is saying that's cuneus.
Agree, sir.
Are there,
Cuneus.
uh,
And
Dr.
what about
Dr. Ruj Bhatti is saying it's lingula. So can you? She's saying that's also involving lingula.
no, sir. I'm not agree with the Dr. Uruj. Dr. Uruj. And can someone tell this is the post as we can see in the on the axial images, which is this structure?
So till the answers, they are saying superior occipital gyrus. Dr. Jibran Tariq, I think is
yes, right. So this section is yes.
Dr. Prawat has also answered correctly. Superior occipital gyrus.
Yes, sir. Agree. As we see on the sagittal view, this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the calcarine fissure. So this is basically involving the cuneus part of the occipital lobe. And on the axial view, this, as we see on the normal side, this portion is the superior occipital gyrus. So this lesion is involving the cuneus and part of the superior occipital gyrus.
For Dr. Uruj, can you show?
Lingula is, I already discussed, lingula is situated below the calcarine fissure. So as we can see, this is the calcarine fissure. This part forms the lingual gyrus, this portion. Another diagram, MRI brain axial view. Can someone tell where does this lesion is located?
So guys, where is this lesion? Anyone? You can make a guess. So Dr. Prawat says Dr. Aman is in love with cuneus because he's saying that's cuneus again.
Yes, agree. It is in cuneus.
So Dr. Ruj Bhatti is saying that's cuneus again. So can we move on to the next scan?
Yes, this is another scan with the axial views. And can someone tell where does this lesion is located?
So guys, where do you think this lesion is? Dr. Prawat is saying that this is the superior occipital. I think he meant superior occipital gyrus. Dr. Ruj Bhatti is also in superior occipital gyrus.
And so, part of the.
And
yes, agree with.
And is it involving something else as well? Or is just the superior occipital gyrus?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Uruj. And Dr. Oswin, and it also involves the part of the middle occipital gyrus too.
So Dr. Rafi said that it's involving the lingula. How can you explain that it's not involving the lingula? And Dr. Oswin also said that it's involving the cuneus. So how can you tell them that it's not involving the cuneus, or is it?
Yes, it, as we can see, this is the calcareous fissure, and this is the cuneus. So this lesion is also involving this the cuneus too, and part of the superior occipital gyrus and part of the middle occipital gyrus.
Dr. Uruj wants you to point out the middle occipital gyrus. Can you just show where the superior and middle occipital gyrus?
Yes, yes.
There's
yes.
no.
This is the this part, as we see. This is the superior occipital gyrus, and this is the middle occipital gyrus. So it's involving the cuneus and the superior and middle occipital gyrus.
And where is the lingula? Can you see the lingula here?
Appreciate lingual gyrus on this image. Below. It will. Again, this is MRI plane with the different views, and can someone tell?
So guys, what areas is it involving? Obviously, it's involving more than one part.
Yes, I agree, sir.
So what part is this lesion? What part of occipital lobe is this lesion involving? Anyone? By now you should all be. So Dr. Oswin is saying that this is involving the occipital gyrus, the superior and middle occipital gyrus. Dr. Rafi is saying the same. Dr. Fawaz is saying the same. I think they're all sitting together.
Yes, I agree with them, sir. Agree with them. And as we can see, this on the axial view, this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the calcareous fissure, and this part is the cuneus, and this part is the superior occipital gyrus, and this is the medial occipital gyrus. So this is a quite big lesion. This is quite big lesion, and it involves all these three gyrus.
So Dr. Ruj was correct when she pointed out that's involving the cuneus other than superior occipital gyrus, middle occipital gyrus.
I agree, sir. I agree with.
Can you explain the anatomy on sagittal as well, since we have a sagittal image as well?
Yes, sir. This is this fissure. This is the parieto-occipital fissure, and this the calcareous fissure is compressed by the lesion. So we can appreciate this is the calcareous fissure, and this portion is the cuneus, and the portion that is situated below the calcareous fissure forms the lingual gyrus. So everyone is clear?
I think everybody is, because they're answering all the questions.
Yes, sir. So this is, I think this is the last slide of my presentation. And I would like to thank you all the participants, and especially Dr. Ayub Saab for giving his precious time to us, and Dr. Salman Sharif and Dr. Saad Akhtar. Dr. Saad, please, can you carry on?
So thank you, Dr. Aman, for a wonderful presentation. I urge all the residents today to go and open their scans and try and identify the structures that have been taught to you today very beautifully by Dr. Aman. I think Dr. Shahid Ayub couldn't join us, I think because of some issues. So I thank you, everybody. If there's any question to Dr. Aman, we'll happy to take it, because we are nearly at the end of time. Next week, we'll be doing surgical approaches, I think, to the occipital and parietal lobe. And then I think that we will start, our second module. If there's any question, I'll be happy to take it. Everybody's saying that you presented really well, Dr. Aman. I think you did a great job. And
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
and I think if there's no question, we like to end the session, or if there's any comment by anyone. Okay, I think let's call it a day. Thank you, Dr. Aman. We'll meet you all next week, same time. And I urge you all to join and tell your friends about it. We're going to learn anatomy. And Dr. Asma is asking where to subscribe on YouTube. There's a channel for Liaquat National Hospital. You can see the videos there. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Aman.
Thank you.